Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Belonging, Your Key to Building a Healthy Work Community. My name is Deborah Bannock, and I am the founder and CEO of Whitney Consulting. And I'm thrilled to have you here today with us. And today you're going to meet some great panelists and some great facilitators who will introduce themselves to you a little bit later in the hour. And I also want to just quickly say a big thank you to some people that you're not going to see today, which include my co-founder, Haley Urbanik, as well as Carolyn Hudson and Peter Ashworth, who helped to edit and put together the content that we're looking at today. So starting our conversation, we are all coming to the table today at a place where we are navigating an unprecedented time. So employees have been going through the sense of uncertainty and change that has resulted from COVID-19. And additionally, many are feeling a lot of pain and confusion because of the increased racial tensions that are going on since the death of George Floyd. So our sense of belonging and connection in the workforce has really been impacted. And today, as we go through our time with you, we're going to talk a little bit about going down to the fundamentals of why and getting a little bit more of a sense of how we can take actions ourselves to solve it. But I want to start by bringing us up to the idea of the fact that when companies are faced with times like this, when they're faced with unprecedented challenges, the first thing that companies do is they stop to reflect on, what are the policies that we have in place? How are we coming together as a workforce? And what are the principles and the major frameworks that we all align to at our business? And they also really get down to work on the programs. So how are we going to fix this situation? What types of systems and tools are we going to put into play to help to make things better? And the problem that we're running into today, and what we hope to be talking about with you, is the fact that we know that when it comes to these situations, that belonging is at the heart of the challenges that many employees are facing. And 79%, this is a Deloitte study that just recently came out in May 2020, and 79% of the respondents to that study said that belonging is a really important topic in our workforce today and something that needs to be addressed. And 93% went on to say, you know what, not only is it important, but it really affects our organizational performance. But only 13% of the leaders who responded to this survey said that they were really ready to address this trend. So think about that. We know that the companies right now are scrambling. They're putting together policies, they're putting together programs, but many of these organizations are feeling like they're ill-equipped to do it well. So that leads us to what we're here to talk about with you today. And that is the fact that while our organizations are striving to make change, there are fantastic things that we can do ourselves to make change when it comes to belonging in the workplace. And that all revolves around our own personal choices. We can change our own behaviors to start to improve belonging at our workplace from the grassroots, from the ground level up. And so today, what we're going to do is we're going to walk you through some discussion on the fundamentals of belonging. What is it and why do we care so much about it? And why does it affect our performance? And then we're going to go into a panel discussion where we've got some great leaders who have agreed to come and share their own personal experiences and opinions when it comes to this topic. And then we're going to wrap with a toolkit that we have put together for you to help to equip you to have better conversations in the workplace and to start to bring belonging in from the foundational level. So just let's go through, and I'll spend a few minutes with you on this idea of belonging and why it matters. And it helps to start by thinking about ourselves as communities. And if you look at the Webster Dictionary, the definition of a community is a unified body of individuals. And these individuals are coming together because they share common characteristics or they follow common ideals. And if we take that idea and that model and we bring it into the workplace, the truth is that our workplaces are communities unto themselves. And in fact, most adults spend about 1/3 of their life at work. So we know that it is a place that we're coming together and we are trying to form communities. As we form communities, we're forming different kinds of communities. So we have our general high-level work community, which is sort of a macro community, if you will. And then our teams themselves are what we call a micro community. It's a smaller version of a community, but we do seek belonging. And we are going into these work groups and we're actually seeking belonging at both the micro level. We want to know that we fit in with our immediate team and that we're wanted and appreciated, but we're also seeking to know that we are belonging at the macro level. So we want to make sure that we are feeling that sense of connection, that leaders appreciate that we're there. So we belong both to our higher level community and our team community. Why do we care so much though? And this is an important place to start. Our ancient minds are hardwired to desire belonging within a community. And the way to think about this is to think about what would happen to these ancient people if they didn't fit in and belong to a community. What that meant for them was likely a lack of shelter, a lack of food, and a lack of protection. And if they are denied those things, our ancient mind knew that that was likely a death sentence. So it triggered a significant amount of fear in our brains and hardwired into our brains this innate desire to belong and to fit in and to know that we're accepted within a group. Now, fast forward to today, and our brains have evolved in incredible ways, but that ancient part of our mind is still very focused on belonging. And in fact, studies are showing that we continue to be scanning for belonging cues continuously. So our minds are very busy, whether we know it or not, or realize it or not, very busy looking around us to make sure, okay, I'm safe here, I fit in. And what is our brain looking for as it's scanning? Our ancient mind is actually looking for some specific belonging cues. And that includes, do I have that sense of closeness to this community I'm trying to fit into? Am I in it? Am I active? And part of that belonging is coming from making eye contact with the people that we're trying to fit in with, because the eye contact really gives us a really good read on how people truly feel about us. We can get a good sense of how people feel by just making that eye contact repeatedly with that group. Mimicry means that I'm with a group that is like myself. So it's common characteristics, common behaviors, common reactions to things. We tend to mimic those that we want to belong and fit in with. And then body language and vocal pitch both say that somebody is leaning into me, they're opening up to me. And we're all very familiar, I think, with many of those concepts, but we follow each other's actions and behaviors, and that's a way of responding at a very basic level to each other. And then intention and inclusion are two really important concepts. What that means in ancient times would be that when the hunt was happening, I was included in the hunt. I was somebody who was valued and needed when that was going on. When you bring that to today, it means that when there's important things happening at work, I am brought in and I feel like I'm a member and I'm contributing. And that idea that inclusion, it really focuses in on saying, I have been brought into the fold, and it leaves me that sense when I have all of these things in play that I am safe here, and it makes me feel secure. That safety is what allows me to then start focusing on other things. So I wanted to spend a minute with you on what actually is happening inside our minds when we are going through these feelings. And if you take a look at the brain and how it reacts to being removed or isolated from a community, what happens is that it triggers what we call the amygdala, which is part of our limbic system. The amygdala is part of our ancient brain, and that is where we get that fight or flight response. And it releases a stress hormone called cortisol. And what that hormone does is it takes that brain activity that we're doing, that focus that we have, the ideas we're generating, the creativity, and everything that we're working on in our frontal lobe, and it pulls that energy right to our fight or flight response to say, am I safe? Am I okay? Do I fit in? Now, I want you to think about the belonging cues that I just went through for a minute. It included proximity. It included eye contact. It included being brought into the fold and being part of things together. Think about what COVID-19 has done to our workers. It has taken us and it has removed us physically from our work environment in many cases. And it has denied us that ability to have those really fundamental basic check-ins with each other's reactions to each other. And that has started to trigger for many people that fear reaction. So it's taken us from our sense of safety and brought us back to that basic need to belong. our brains do other things with us that we may not actually even realize are happening. And that I want to spend a minute with you on as well. So our brain actually builds over time what we call unconscious bias. And unconscious bias is this area where when we are having our experiences, when we're living our day-to-day life, we are actually kind of categorizing and building a framework inside of our minds on things that we find acceptable and things that we are drawn to and things that we want to stay away from. Two kinds of bias affect us when we think about building community. The first is affinity bias, and it kind of lends back to that idea of mimicry. And what it means that I tend to feel more comfortable and respond more positively to things that are very similar to myself. So it's that idea of I have common characteristics, I feel comfortable and safe with people who are similar to myself. And perception bias is this idea that I tend to categorize a group based on experiences that I've had. And when I categorize that group, it makes it really difficult for me to take out how I feel and look at an individual without applying those characteristics to that individual and look at them as a unique and distinct person. So those two things, when we start to think about building community together, if we don't carry that awareness, we might be doing things and making decisions about people we allow into our community based on these biases that we may not even be aware of. The positive of this is that if we are stopping to think about things like the belonging cues that are important to people as they're coming into groups and the possibilities that we might be harboring some unconscious bias that we're not even aware of, we can make better decisions. We can take more control over and be more mindful of the way that we're connecting with people at work. So I want to share one last piece of why belonging plays such a significant role in the workplace. And I'm going to borrow from a great book that I recently read called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. It's by Tim Clark and highly recommend it. But belonging is that fundamental level. Belonging is sort of that baseline where we all walk in. And if we don't achieve that sense of safety, it makes it really difficult for us to start to exhibit other behaviors that are really geared towards performance. In fact, when we think about belonging, belonging truly is the gateway to individual performance. Once I have established that sense of safety and belonging and fitting in, then I feel like I'm free to start to expand myself. I can be curious. I can start to learn and to grow. And earning that right and having that space between myself and the people, my leader and the people I work with is really critical. It's something that we sort of earn together and we create that psychologically safe place where I can be curious here. It's safe for me to ask questions and learn and strive. And then once I've established myself, the goal is that I then can represent my group and I'm trusted and empowered to lead out and to contribute on behalf of my group. And that's contributor safety. I can go out there and be the one who represents. And then ultimately, once I've come to this place and I've earned this space with my leader, my team, and myself creating this environment together, I can challenge, which means this is the space where I can lead us in new directions. I can take personal risk to try new things and feel like people have my back. And I can go out there and start to drive innovation and change at my organization. That is the ideal. Now, once we reach that level, it's a great thing, but it is a hard place to reach and a very easy place to lose. And what can happen is simple things can be done that could take someone's sense of psychological safety who's gone all the way up this ladder and move them all the way back down to questioning, do I really fit in here? Do I really belong? And if you think about the things that we started this meeting with COVID-19, and then also with the racial tensions that have come up, there may be things that have been said or have occurred at work that have kind of stripped that person's feeling of a valued contributor and brought them back down to that sense of, maybe I truly don't fit in. And so what we need to think about as we go through and continue to have this dialogue today is, are we making sure that we're creating that environment where people don't even have to question they belong? Those people that are with us on our team, do they know we have their backs and that they're part of this group and they're a valued member? So what we're going to do before we go into our panelist discussion is I'm just going to high level share with you the 6 simple shifts that I mentioned that are part of the toolkit that you'll be leaving with today. And I want to share it with you up front because then you can listen for some of these things as we hear our panelists' reactions to things. So the first is to self-reflect truthfully. If we want to create belonging in the workplace, we need to be really mindful of what we are owning as part of this equation. So if I'm going and I'm looking around and saying, well, they're not being very empathetic to me, they're not creating a feeling of belonging with me, am I actually being responsible to start to create that feeling for other people on my team as well? So it's an equation. It's something that we have to have both members kind of actively working on. We also, when it comes to creating belonging, need to ask better questions of each other. We have historically been going through our day-to-day work and been very careful about how we talk to each other. And it's time to start to peel back our onions a little bit and be able to create a place of vulnerability and safety to have really rich conversations. And when you have better questions, you get much bigger and better answers. But we need to learn to listen more effectively to these answers and be able to take action based on what we're hearing. And in order to do that, we need to use more reflective listening, confirm understanding, and be able to make ourselves vulnerable to a point where we understand we may not like some of the things that we're hearing when we ask really good questions, but we need to learn to stay open so that we can address what's underneath the questions and not just the words that are coming out of someone's mouth. And then reinforcing shared values. Shared values, when it comes to building a community, even in our ancient times, we would be looking for the characteristics and behaviors of that group. In our workplace today, our shared values help to create a framework where we can have both positive conversations and building conversations where we might be needing to change behavior a little bit. So those shared values provide that framework where we can say, this is how our community has agreed that we will behave. And if we need to make adjustments to that, it provides this great framework for a fabulous conversation around that. And finally, we often think that once we've had a great, really impactful conversation with someone that we've done our job. So, I sat down with Leanna, we ended up having a great conversation about something that happened. I felt like we really bonded. If I'm not fueling that connection over time, if I'm not repeatedly going back and revisiting and building that connection, it is lost. So sustaining human connection, creating human connection is not a one and done. It is a continuous effort that needs to happen with each individual on your team. And finally, owning your impact. It's never been more important for us to understand that we ourselves can make a difference when it comes to changing our own unique work cultures and our own unique work communities. So building belonging is something that we can own and build accountability for ourselves. And that is going to be included, again, as I mentioned, in the toolkit. So this all adds up to what we call at Whitney Consulting inspired human connection. Again, the focus is on the space between human beings at work, how we connect to get work done. And the goal is to understand, do we have spaces in the workplace that are rich with trust and respect and belonging and safety to go out and take personal risk and contribute and ask good questions and be curious. So inspired human connection is the ultimate way for us to build a organization where we have people that are connecting around work in a positive, healthy, and productive way. So to expand on this idea, we're going to now go into our panelist discussion. And I'm really excited to introduce you to Christina Itzkowitz. Christina was the Executive Director of Global Talent Management for a large contract research organization with over 18,000 employees. And she has gone out now and she's created her own company called Blueprint by Design to help human resource leaders to bring really smart ideas into the employee journey. So Christina is going to introduce you to our facilitators and her fellow facilitator, and she's also going to introduce you to our panelists and kick off our conversation. So thanks, Christina.
Well, before we begin, I'd like to go ahead and have each of our members just share a quick update, share a quick introduction of who they are. So if we could start with Ben, just to share a quick introduction of who you are with the team.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Cook, as Christina mentioned, and really happy to be here and hear everyone's perspective. I run a boutique strategy shop called Red Pill Strategies. We're focused on how the transformation into the digital age sort of changes the way that people think about every aspect of their working life, from employee community to their engagement strategies more broadly. And like Christina mentioned, I'm really here to help facilitate the Q&A and listen and learn from my great panelists. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. All right, Omari, if you could share a quick introduction.
Hi, everyone. Really excited to be part of the program today. I'm Omari Jahi-Aarons. I'm the president of the National African American Insurance Association of Boston, which is the newest chapter of NAAIA, which is an organization that's been around since 1997 and really helps to connect racially diverse professionals in the insurance industry together to advise and to counsel organizations on diversity and inclusion practices and really create safe spaces for career growth and development for our members. I'm also very proud to work for Liberty Mutual Insurance in our customer advocacy office as a director of employee enablement, and have been part of the insurance and financial services industry for the last 14 years. So really excited to be able to share a perspective from a corporate America viewpoint as well.
Fantastic. Thanks, Omari. And Beverly.
Thanks, Christina. My name is Beverly King. I am Director of Client Development and Consulting for a company called Graebel, based out of Denver, Colorado. But as you can hear, I'm not American. I'm actually based in London. And my role is really to support big corporations with the transferring of their employees around the world from a global mobility point of view, and often helping them with various different consulting projects as well. And before joining Graebel, I actually had a long history within HR reward roles as well, and had a very heavy focus on employee benefits, particularly well-being and recognition programs as well. So this is a significant area of interest and focus for me, not just professionally, but also personally as well. And I'm really looking forward to the discussion today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Beverly. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into our questions for today. So our first question is to Omari, if that's okay. So what do you feel is the most important message for our people leaders to hear today about equality and belonging at work? And what do we risk by not sending these messages?
Yeah, it's a great question to get us started, because there's so much conversation right now happening around belonging, around diversity, about inclusion, around equity. And we're starting to shift the conversation from talking about equality in the workplace, even from a leadership development standpoint, and thinking about how do we provide every employee the same thing, right? And really starting to think about equality and equity in terms of access to what we're providing to employees, right? So what makes sense for you based on where you are in your career and what your own individual career aspirations are, right? And so what we're seeing from a leadership development standpoint is more and more people talking about personalized development plans, really connecting with you about what you want to see happen in your career and what the opportunities are. We're in an interesting moment in time. I was having a conversation the other day about when COVID first started, right? I felt like every company that had my email address ever sent me a note to let me know about what they were doing in terms of their COVID response, both from a customer standpoint and how I could continue to interact with them for the products and services that they provide, and also really how they were taking care of their people in the workplace. And this pandemic is not something that we've seen in our lifetimes to this scale. And so this is not a way that we've seen corporate America and organizations really show up before, and being able to send out messages like this around well-being. And then, 2 months later, you really started hearing more loudly these questions of racial injustice and witnessing, in particular, George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And now we've seen something that we can't unsee. And so we also saw another rush of statements, of action plans come out from companies as well. And so when we started thinking about well, what does that mean for the people that are inside of our organizations, right? And so what is it that they need to hear as they were grappling with the impacts of COVID and how, you know, some of us are becoming teachers for young people in our houses, taking care of people in our families, maybe financially supporting people who are furloughed or out of work, right? And so it's really starting to think about on an individual basis, you know, what do people need? And then from a racial equality standpoint as well, how these issues, and not just for the Black or African American community, but also thinking about the Asian community that had a number of racial discrimination, physical violence happen at the onset of COVID due to some efforts around fear, right? And you know, so what is it that we really need to provide to people? Not asking those questions, not asking people, how are you doing? How are you dealing with all of this? How is this impacting your life? How is it impacting your day-to-day? And what are the things that I can do as your manager? What are the things that as an organization that you work for that we can do on a broader scale to be able to support you? Really signals to people that, you know, you don't belong. And we're talking a lot in this space around enabling people to bring their whole selves to work, right? And so this is a moment where if we ask the right questions and we do the right things, it will really say to people that when we say bring your whole self to work, we are not just saying the parts of you that we find acceptable and that are easy to talk about and that are really fun water cooler conversations that we have over Zoom, right? But really all of you, because as a workplace community where we generally spend more time than we spend with our own families, you matter here and you belong here.
Love that. That's a powerful statement. I love that at the end there. Yep. And the connection piece that you talked about, Omari. I'm working with 2 clients right now, and when, like exactly what you said, when this whole thing's this event happened, they're like, what do we do, Christina? I'm like, connect. Ask your people how you're doing. Like, don't avoid it. Avoidance does not help to solve for anything. So that's a very powerful statement. Thanks, Omari. All right, so Beverly, we've got a question for you, if that's okay.
Sure.
We know from a recent Qualtrics study that 2 out of 5 respondents said that their mental health has declined since this whole COVID event took place. And what do you hope people leaders are doing to create a more mentally healthy environment on their teams? How can we help?
Yeah, obviously, as Omari was sharing just now, you know, everyone right now is very anxious about a number of different things. You know, this whole scenario is creating lots of anxiety, both from a professional and a personal point of view, as well as, you know, often quite an overload of information about what's going on, and the added responsibilities of, you know, other things like worrying about your family, your whether that's your children or even your parents in a lot of cases as well, and their health, and juggling your work activities at the same time as being concerned if your job is even going to be safe, right? And so I think, like, from my experience and my point of view, I think what's really important is having that leadership transparency. So, you know, making sure that leadership are being open and honest about what's going on from an internal point of view and sharing some of the decisions they're making. And that's something that we've definitely benefited from within our company, Graebel. We have had a very transparent and open leadership in the last few months. So they've made extra effort to hold additional town halls and fireside chats every couple of weeks to really, you know, share with different members around the organization, and bringing in other speakers as well, not just the very top management, but others as well, about what's going on and how we're adjusting. In addition to that, I would say a very open and transparent empathy in terms of how they're feeling as well. You know, emotional at times, and you know, that's not something you see in many organizations, but, you know, it's certainly something I've appreciated, and I know others as well. You know, it's hard for our leaders as well to bear with some of these challenges, I think. So being open and honest about that with others means that, you know, all of us around the organization aren't afraid to speak up when we're struggling. And the overarching message is always that, you know, put your families first, and that they understand that you have to try and balance everything. So I think that's really, really important as a starter. And then to Omari's point as well, being your true self at work is also really important. And, you know, even if leadership aren't, I guess, giving out those messages, you know, I very much believe that it's important to be yourself at work, and then others will follow. And, you know, it's okay to be anxious. You know, there was a client I was talking to a few weeks ago, and she was sharing with me that in her organization, she was in a group meeting. So, you know, one of those very frequent team meetings that have been happening now by Zoom or Teams or whatever format you use. And her team were having a group meeting, and, you know, everyone was going around the meeting as an introduction going, "Hi, how are you doing? I'm fine." And everybody was going, "Yeah, I'm good. And this was early on in COVID, and she was the only person that actually stepped up and said, "You know, I'm actually quite anxious. I'm quite worried about things." And she said that once she said that, others were also then opening up as well. But until she took that brave step, others were quite nervous to say something. So I think it's also important to be open and honest, and others will follow that. And we are all anxious at this time. So it is often the case that by talking about it, it makes things easier. And if you're able to do that within a group, that's great. If you're not able to do that with a group, I'd say, you know, talking with another trusted partner at work is also something to think about. And then, yeah, finally, celebrating differences. So, you know, more than ever, with all the events happening during this year, you know, I guess taking enjoyment in what we get out of our daily lives, you know, whether that's at work or at home, embracing different views and perspectives in a positive way, because I think what we've all learned through this situation is the value of community. And I, again, have seen a lot of great examples where community has become stronger in my own street even, but, you know, also within my work community, with friends. And I think that just valuing those different interactions and those perspectives and those different connections you have is really, really helpful to help manage some of these pressures.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree with you on that. Yep. And then we have just one more quick question here, then we'll turn over to Ben if there are any questions from the participants. So we've talked about some challenging scenarios, right? So what gives you the most hope for improved belonging in our workplace communities? So Beverly or Omari, feel free to.
Beverly, you start.
I mean, I think I very much think of kind of the whole diversity and inclusion and advocating mental health as well. You know, we all have our own responsibility, and I think that people have taken a lot of effort in the last few months to step up and to reach out to others, and that's been great because, you know, I've seen, you know, many people kind of being self-isolated before these events, and actually those who are at home on their own and you know, struggling with work and maybe their personal feelings, that's really important. And I think that we all have our part to play to kind of drive change, much like our climate situation as well. We all have to take responsibility. So I think, you know, having the opportunity and encouraging questions being asked, you know, that what Debbie was talking about earlier on, you know, encouraging questions, making sure that people feel it's safe to learn, encouraging others to contribute what their feelings are, their thoughts are, but also to challenge. And, you know, again, I think I've seen and I've heard from other clients as well, much more going on in terms of others challenging. And I hear things changing in organizations, focuses are improving. You know, many of the clients we talk to are very much focused on diversity and inclusion actually now, which had never really been something that had been discussed so much until this year. And I do think that we have an opportunity here to be optimistic and to continue that momentum and continue to drive change, because if we don't, we'll miss out on a very great opportunity.
That's right. Well said. Thanks, Beverly. And Omari?
Yeah, I love all of that. You know,
Me too. Thumbs up.
We could just end it right there. You know, I was thinking about the poll question that we asked, right? Like, and it's so great to see so many people out of our audience today say, you know, 60%, right? Say like, I feel like I can be my whole self. I'm probably a B on that. Like, I was the next level down there. Most of the time, I feel accepted in my workplace environment and organizations that I'm a part of, right? Like most of the time, I feel pretty good. But there are moments that I'm, you know, just personally feel challenged. about being able to bring my whole self to work, and to think about, what's impacting me and if I can share that. So, I would agree. I think what gives me hope in this moment is that we are talking about these things, right? And that there's no issue that's not on the table anymore. And so from a sexual orientation, from an immigration status, from a race standpoint, from a gender standpoint, right? The many different, from a mental health standpoint, the many different dimensions of diversity, that's a tongue twister, that we all carry, right? We're able to talk about all of these things in the workplace, even in the moments where it's uncomfortable, right? We're seeing many more organizations step forward and make some public statements about things, and many more that aren't making public statements, but are doing some work internally with their own employees that have employee resource groups or employee affinity groups that are meeting to be able to discuss these issues. And for me, that's what's giving us hope. I think it gives me hope. In the past, I think we've given a lot of companies and organizations credit for just having the conversation, right? And
That's
so
right.
it's an important distinction that in this moment in time, you have a lot of people that are saying, hey, we've had this conversation before, right? 10 years ago, I sat in another focus group, maybe with a different leader, and had this exact same conversation about my experience in the workplace. Mm-hmm. Now, what's really important is I think we're seeing a groundswell of support and advocacy from both our customer bases and from our internal employees to say talking is not enough. So while talking is important and listening is important, really that has to have the end goal of what are we going to do? There needs to be an action plan. And so I'm hopeful that this groundswell moment is going to create a lot of action plans in this space. And that's going to make things better for everyone in the workplace and help them feel like they belong.
I completely agree. Yep. And I think we have a few questions from our participants. So I'm going to turn it over to Ben. I think Ben might be on mute, I believe.
Thanks, Deb.
There
Thanks,
he
Christina,
is.
and everyone. Yeah, it looks like we have two great questions. Thank you, Elizabeth York, for giving us our first questions. And I think we'd encourage everyone to chime in. We really want to make this a group discussion, because these are issues that touch all of us. But yeah, I think we can kick it off with from Elizabeth York. And if anyone wants to dive in and take this, we have. What are some of the most successful actions that you have experienced that have supported inclusion? And maybe we can bundle these two together and say, at the same time, what are some of the missteps you've witnessed that we could learn to avoid?
I was sharing an example of a company not to be named, but yesterday, of showing up at a conference that was a racial affinity conference, and no one from that company matched the affinity of the conference, right? It's like sending a team of men to like a women's MBA conference as the recruiters, because the participants there want to come up to the table and talk to someone about not just your employee benefits, not just what the salary of the roles are and like career mobility, but like, what does that experience look like as a woman inside the company? And that's not a question I can answer, right? And so I'm happy to talk about the workplace culture, and I know a lot about what's happening from a inclusion standpoint led by our women's resource group, but it's not the same as someone who comes up to the table as a woman who wants to talk about what it's like to be a woman in the company that I work for, right? And so those are some of like the glaring I'm not sure you get why you're here moments that I've seen with organizations. So it's like, don't do that. And at the same and so the converse of that is like, so what then should you do, right? And because there's a line here between tokenizing employees, and so you don't want to go to a woman in your organization and say, hey, we need some women to show up at this conference, like, can you come? But really choosing people that who add value. It's like, there are women in your organization who can come and talk about benefits, who can talk about the workplace culture, who can talk about career mobility, right? And by the way, they should already be on your team, right? They should already be part of the recruiting process. They should already be brand ambassadors. So you shouldn't need to go out and get kind of this additional group of people at the last minute to try to check a box for a particular initiative. And that goes back to like our workplace staffing and hiring practices. Like, how do we ensure that there's diversity, racial diversity, gender diversity that exists within teams, especially your public facing teams and teams that do work that's public facing, so that you have those perspectives at the table.
Yeah, I'd add to what Omari said and just say, you know, the worst examples I've seen is where, to be honest, and being candid, and again, I won't name any company names, but it's where leadership will say one thing but do something completely different. And that's just, that ruins any kind of aspect of trust as an employee. And you know, I think that also, from that psychological safety point of view, means that you will feel you're not part of belonging to that organization, right? The leadership are telling you one thing and do this and do that, and we're going to be more inclusive, or, you know, follow our example. But actually, when they do those steps, they're not actually doing the same ethics that they're preaching. So I think that's really, really important, and I've experienced that firsthand, and that has a huge impact to the value of trust. So I think that's what I would totally advocate in any kind of scenario, that leadership really preach and talk the talk and walk the walk.
Well, I think there's maybe an interesting, if we're talking about what leadership should do. Our next question is more focused on, I think, what, more of like on an individual level. This is from an anonymous attendee who asks, historically, workplaces have had defined boundaries regarding what we can discuss at work and what is personal. Would we say that boundaries should not exist? Or if so, how do we find that right balance?
It's an excellent question. I love this question.
I like that one.
Like politics is one of the things that like we're not really supposed to talk about at work. Religion's not one of the things that we're supposed to talk about at work. Sexual orientation is not one of the things that we're supposed to talk about at work, right? And yet, like, all of these things are part of who we are. And so there's a way to be able to talk about them. And there's a way in which like they need to come up when you're talking about whether you feel included or excluded at work, or what would help you to feel. My experience with belonging and inclusion in particular is that most people, it's very easy to identify moments where you feel deliberately excluded in the workplace, right? Like, that didn't feel right to me. What's harder to identify is the moments that like something clicked and you went, like, now I know I can do these things. Now I know I can speak up. Now I know I can challenge the status quo. And so, when you think about these things that are the topics that we're not supposed to talk about in the workplace, right? And I look at voting as an example of that. I live in a zip code where it doesn't take me longer than 10 minutes to vote, and 7 minutes of that is the drive to the library where my polling location is. And so I don't need any workplace accommodations to be able to go vote. I can do it early in the morning. I can do it on my lunch break, right? I might have to wait, 15 minutes, right, in order for me to be able to do that. But it's not a huge imposition to my workplace experience. But if I live in a zip code where there are deliberate voter suppression efforts taking place to disenfranchise my vote, where there aren't voting machines, or there's one with a larger population, right? These are real things. For me to go vote, it's not something I can do on my lunch break if I'm standing there for 3 hours at a time, right? And so how do I have that conversation with my manager, especially if my manager's experience is like he gets to go vote in 10 minutes, right? And so here I come talking about it takes me 3 hours to vote. Like, what? Like, that's outside of my experience. And so, how do you talk about that if in the workplace? And it's essential that we do, so that we understand, even though, another zip code is literally 5 minutes outside my door, what it takes for someone to be able to vote there versus where I am is completely different.
And I think I personally love to hear from either Beverly or Deb. Just I know both of you are big advocates for mental health in the workplace, and that's something that is, you know, about as personal as it gets. And really, I think there's been a lot of shifting norms in terms of the boundaries that our anonymous questionnaire has asked.
And Beverly, I can speak to that for just a minute, and then would love to hear from you as well.
Go ahead.
This is an area where there's been a tremendous amount of change. And in addition to the work I do professionally, I also am on the board for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And I've been trained by them in suicide prevention and support group facilitation. And it's a topic that is really important to me. And the beautiful thing is that, you know, we have a situation where 1 in 5 adults, which has progressed to be even a larger percent now because of COVID, but 1 in 5 adults has a form of mental illness today, and they are bringing that into the workplace. And the progression that we've made with people being brave and telling their stories and owning it has resulted in more and more people feeling that freedom and strength to be able to speak about their challenges at work, which means that we have more people that are able to bring more of their whole self to work and become and stay productive, where in the past that has been such a taboo and stigma-ridden subject that people have not talked about it, which has only made it more difficult for them to continue to perform at work. So being able to share, I am in a place where I'm suffering, I have a mental illness of anxiety or depression right now. I am working hard, but I want you to be aware of it, manager, because it means that I might have some issues that I have to take care of medically. But you are, as a person struggling with mental illness, you have not only the ability to speak for yourself, but you also are protected to be able to say, I may need an accommodation because it isn't a form of illness. So that dialogue has changed tremendously. That framework or that idea that it's stigmatized and forbidden from being talked about has decreased. And what's happening is many people who have these illnesses are top performers, and we're losing less of our top performers because they feel like they have to hide their illness, and they're able to treat it and take care of themselves in a healthy way. So I'll shift it back over to you, Beverly, but thank you for asking that question. I think that's a really important dynamic.
Thanks, Deb. And I would echo that, you know, the 1 in 5 with mental illness, I would probably argue it's even more than that, right? Because at any point during our lives, we're all of us, no one's immune, is going to be subject to some kind of a stress from your mental health. You know, we've all been stressed through COVID, but there are other things, right? So whether that's marriage, which is a positive thing, but also creates stress, divorce, moving house, moving country if you're an assignee, you know, having a baby or losing a baby. I've had friends that have lost babies. And even having a baby and the postnatal depression, you know, all of these things, there's so many different things, that the death of a loved one, so many things that create mental stress on us. And I think we all need to understand that we all have our moments in time where we will be struggling with these things. And, you know, to the point about how much you share personally, I think we all need to respect our own boundaries about how much we do share. But at the same time, understanding that, you know, not everyone is going to be okay all of the time, and to be tolerant and make some acknowledgement when people are struggling. And, you know, again, you're not going to know every single scenario, but if someone's not quite their self, if they're not quite themselves, then acknowledge there must be a reason why, you know, it's not their normal character. And I think that's really one of the biggest things I would say. You know, be sympathetic, be kind, be understanding, try to ask the right questions, but not be intrusive. And I think that really, you know, will help a long way to create more of a sense of trust and belonging, and to improve the way that people do deal with mental health issues in their work environment.
Thanks. I think something that both just mentioned was just talking about the you know, this time right now as uniquely challenging, uniquely stressful. And Jennifer asks us, considering all of those current stressors and pressures on the workforce right now, what advice might you have for making the case from a business perspective that the time for inclusion is imperative right now for everyone? And I also want to just add on, then, so I love that question, because it's how do you make this a business case, particularly for maybe people who are less comfortable talking about these issues. And then also, are there any actions that you would recommend as you're making that business case that could really change that feeling of belonging, foster psychological safety based on your experience? I think we can open that to anyone.
Should I start? Or, sorry, take your thunder, Omari. I mean, when you think about organizations, most organizations are generally focusing on a wide subset of customers, consumers, and they're often not represented by one single group. So if you within your organization are only representative of a small number of groups, or minimal number of groups, then you're not really opening up the opportunities to embrace the customer mindset that you're trying to sell to, or you're trying to create services for. So, number one, I think, that is the hugest part of a business case, is to understand your own consumer base, and maybe to enlarge your consumer base as well. That's another thing. If you haven't already attracted some different groups, then by opening up your own inclusion, that's going to enhance your offerings and the community that you'll be serving. And the other thing is around, and this is something I've always done in my previous times in HR, is talking about the value of recruitment, and the value and the cost of recruitment, training, learning, and some of those hidden costs that we don't really have pinned down, but really like the amount of knowledge that gets lost when people leave an organization, and the value of that. And if people become disenchanted because they don't feel belonging within that organization, then there's a huge value that actually gets lost from a knowledge base, but also from a productivity point of view as well. So I think that there are two huge reasons why having a business case is important, and there is an awful lot to be said to adding more perspective in this area.
Yeah. 60 seconds on that. I have a love-hate relationship with this question, right? Because there's a part of me that goes, it's 2020. Like, who is still asking for a business case for diversity and inclusion? Like, go to Google and then come back and have a conversation with me, because like, you're not even ready. But when COVID first happened, there were a number of companies who quietly really said, we have to like step back from that, from the diversity and inclusion work that we're doing, so that we can really prioritize COVID. And it was like, COVID and what it was creating for people was this feeling of exclusion from the workplace. And so diversity and inclusion is not the work that you need to deprioritize in the middle of a crisis. It's the work that really gets you through the crisis, right? And and so I think for me, I always say, like, you start with the real examples in your organization on what your current D&I strategy has contributed in terms of retention, in terms of productivity, in terms of employee engagement. But also think about the areas where your current D&I strategy is not serving you well, right? Like where you realize we're in stage one and our aspirational state is 4 stages away. And because we're not there, what are we losing today, right? Both in terms of people, in terms of the efficiencies, in terms of innovation of ideas. But it's unfortunate that this is still a real question. And I think what we're seeing even now in the response from, really sparked by George Floyd at the end of May, early June, is that this work is critically important, and that it touches more than just the one subsect of employees that you would likely think is impacted by this thing, right? There was a lot of priority from COVID on working mothers, and definitely an audience that we don't talk enough about in the workplace. But COVID didn't just impact working mothers. It impacted a whole, it impacted all of us, all different employee types. And what happened from a racial injustice standpoint in the United States didn't just impact Black employees, right? Like it impacted a whole suite of people. So, the work is critically important across the board in every aspect of how we do business and in every aspect of our workplace cultures.
Love that. I love that. Great. Well, I know we're coming up on the end of our hour. Maybe we can just give a very quick answer to, because Gareth has, I think, a great sort of an idea for a litmus test that a company could, leadership could ask, you know, of just, is there any type of person in our organization who might not feel comfortable here? And then if yes, you know, who are they and why? And I really like that because I think it's comes back to the sort of title we gave to this whole discussion, which is about hope. And so maybe if anyone has a quick comment on that or anything else that you feel like gives you hope for the future and sort of a you know, positive next steps when we're talking about all of these, all of this meaty discussion.
And I wonder if if it'd be okay if we actually flip it over to Deb. I know Deb wanted to share the toolkit with folks as to what they will walk away with. I wonder if we could follow up with a response to that question, if that's okay for everyone.
And what I will do is I can kind of transition into that. And I think this idea of a litmus test, or, you know, having people be able to think about mindfully about the types of people that connect to the organization. It kind of ties right into, honestly, the whole conversation as well about the idea of a business case. But what we need to think about is that belonging happens by really having that deep understanding of our employees. And to me, this is a place where grassroots efforts meets strategic thinking, so that we are building strategies, we are thinking mindfully about ourselves in a very well-informed way, which means that we're leaning in on our employees to understand how they feel and what they need. And that's really, there's no true way to set up a, you know, this is the target group that doesn't belong. You need to be actively listening to employees across the board consistently so that they're able to vocalize their needs, because they're dynamic, and we're going to have groups that may feel included or excluded at different times. And then also, I do have some thoughts on, I know that it's hard to hear those words business case, but it is a reality of trying to be able to have people be able to achieve and protect dollars for their budget, to create great programs and to start to drive change within an organization when we talk about shifting policies and programs. And I will include in our kit the fact that there's amazing studies that talk about the richness and the impact on performance of having diversity. And there's also amazing studies that are showing us that people are feeling less secure, and that's affecting their productivity. So the benefit that we might be gaining from thinking about diversity can't be realized if we're losing productivity because of our mental health. And so there's some great data and statistics that can help, and some stories that you can tell to enrich that conversation. So I'm just going to show you really quickly as we wind down that we are going to be sending you after this meeting our toolkit on the 6 simple shifts that you can take, because really when it comes to belonging, these changes are about changing the way human beings interact. We can work very hard to create a framework in which people are interacting, but it is a person's individual willingness to stay open and to create belonging with the people around them that is going to truly change the organization. So what you're going to see and what's included in this toolkit for you is the information that we shared at the beginning of this meeting. So the definition of community and what that means to us, and how our businesses are communities unto themselves. The information that we talked about, what our minds are doing when we feel excluded, and the idea of that instinctual search for the belonging cues, as well as the possibilities that we need to pause and think about bias. So we're sharing that information with you to have at your fingertips. And we're also going to remind you of the model of psychological safety and how belonging is a gateway to that, so that you have that knowledge as you're thinking about the way that you're connecting with people and trying to maintain that sense of connection. You heard some great examples as the panelists talked about some of their own experiences, but we wanted to include elements that are behaviors or actions that deny psychological safety and belonging, and how that could have been transformed by changing just the way we talk to people, just the way we engage with people, to become positive builders of psychological safety and belonging. So we gave you some specific examples, which I bet you'll recognize as you go in and read through these. And then we also wanted to make sure you understand that that ultimate goal is that we're creating pockets. It's all about the space in between human beings and how we're connecting to get work done. And so the goal is that we're creating that space that's really rich in trust and respect and belonging, and being able to challenge ourselves. And the reminder that it's all up to us. So we all can leave and say, well, human resources has got this, they're working on a strategy. Well, it's not true. If we walk out the door and tomorrow we deny someone psychological safety or exclude them, we're not helping anything. So it's up to us to be mindful of the way we're interacting, and that's how we'll grow a healthier organization. We're providing you with the 6 simple steps. And honestly, this is information that each one of these steps could be a webinar to itself. So what we hope that you'll do with this toolkit is understand that we're giving you some practices and broad high-level actions to get your creative juices flowing. And then we're going to follow up and continue to have an ongoing series of webinars to really break down and get into each one of these steps. But it starts with self-reflection, as we said. What are we bringing into this equation? Are we making ourselves vulnerable? Are we giving acceptance in addition to just expecting that of ourselves? And then asking connecting questions. And I think there's some great, I loved how Omari was saying, you know, being able to have conversations where we're just not having the fun stuff that we're talking about, we're having the real stuff. And that's how we truly build conversations. And Beverly added that idea of, one of the first steps to have those great conversations is to make yourself vulnerable first, so that you are being authentic and real about your fears. You're not just saying, hey, I'm great. You're saying, well, I am having some trouble, and here's what's got me worried right now, as you're starting these conversations. And that you're listening with empathy, and that means active listening. So we're reacting to the emotions, not just the words, because we know that those words are something that could be masking a lot more feeling. We want to be looking underneath for what that real meaning is, and asking clarifying questions to make sure we're with that person that we're listening to. And then when we use our values, when we remember the ancient mind and how we know that we belong into a community, is because we know that we mimic the way that they behave. Same thing at work. Our shared values become a structure where we can have healthy conversations. And it also becomes that structure where if unhealthy behaviors are happening, we can use that framework to help us to bridge a really positive conversation. And then sustaining human connection and remembering that walking away saying, I just had the best meeting with Layla, and now she totally is on the same page with me, and I know we've totally connected, and I don't talk to her for 3 weeks. That doesn't work. We have to be thinking about this as an ongoing, active, fluid connection that we're having with people. And finally, the last step is owning our impact. And that means owning the fact that we have to stand up for ourselves and make sure that we're being open and honest about what we need when it comes to belonging, and also being that person who is driving the difference. Because if we change our actions are the things that are going to start to change the experiences our employees and colleagues are having at work. And those experiences they have are what truly sets their belief. So we won't change beliefs unless we start changing the way we behave. And that's how we create hope at work. So I wanted to let you know, we've already started to load you up in the back of your toolkit with some great books and studies that we highly recommend. And that will be provided so that you'll have that so that you can go and do your own homework about getting active and taking ownership of this yourself. And I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for coming out and joining us. It's been great to be having the conversation with you. I think it's a hugely important conversation. And this is really a result of some great collaboration with the people that you just were spending time with on the session today. So a big thank you to them. And please reach out if there's anything else you want to learn or talk about. We are so happy to stay in touch and to keep informing you about this really important topic. So reach out to Haley and myself if you have any questions, and we'll bring those answers right to you. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you for being a part of this discussion. And let's all leave here with the attitude that we can go out and create hope in our own workplaces. Thanks everyone, and have a great one.